Good morning. All right, hi. We're about to get started. Our first speaker is going to join us on Zoom, Kingsley Owadara, who is an advocate for responsible AI and AI ethics, the founder of the Pan-African Center for AI Ethics. He believes that artificial intelligence should be developed and deployed for common good by considering the factors that make them ethical and socially responsible. Having a background in law and computer engineering, Kingsley has a deep understanding of the potential impacts of AI on individuals, communities, and the environments, with a special focus on Africa. Kingsley's experience is across academia, industry, and NGO.
Hi, Kingsley. Can you hear us? There we go. I see.
Yes, please confirm.
Perfect, perfect. Are you ready to present?
Just give me some 5 minutes just to share my slides and then
Yeah, you can share your slides and you can put on your camera, just so that everyone can see you.
Sure, I'll do that. I'll do that. All right, please confirm if you're able to see me. If you're able to hear me and you're also able to see me.
We can see you.
Okay, just a moment.
There we go. We can see you now. We can see your slides. Just waiting for your
Okay,
slides.
I wasn't expecting it to come this soon. So right. So good morning, everyone. I trust we've been having a wonderful time, the conference. Personally, I have been having a wonderful time, and I'm sure that, we all have been having a great time too. Um, I'll be speaking about a particular subject I am excited about, an ongoing work, and I do hope that everybody will be excited to listen to what I'm presenting as much as I am excited to do that too. So this morning, I will be talking about, just my slides. Okay, so, just a few moments. All right, are you able to see my slides?
Just hold on. We can see your slides.
Awesome. So I'll be talking very briefly this morning on Indigenous data governance in algorithm modeling. And I find it very, very interesting, especially at this time where artificial intelligence is impacting almost all sectors, in the world. Why is my slide loading? So what's going on? Okay, so let's look briefly into the problem. The one of the things that I considered while delving into this research is the significant gap in the literature on the inclusion of indigenous voices in the development of technology that relies on data, lack of sensitivity towards indigenous community, and lack of understanding of the issues faced by these communities. And the subtle threats of extinction of indigenous knowledge by the rapid adoption of artificial intelligence, just as some animals have gone into extinction, by virtue of either low conservation rates and the like. So there's the likelihood, which I see as a threat, of the extinction of indigenous knowledge by the rapid adoption of artificial intelligence in all sectors. And then we also see, for me, I also see the issues around the misrepresentation of indigenous data present or represented in AI tools. Now, what is the motivation for this particular work for me? My first motivation, for this work started, when my country, Nigeria, released, the Data Protection Act, and under the Data Protection Act, there is a particular tool that was referred, or a particular definition or provision that refers to data processors or data controllers of major importance. And what does this mean? It refers it as a data controller or data processor that is domiciled, resident, or operating in Nigeria and processes or intend to process personal data of more than such number of data subjects while within Nigeria, or such other class of data controllers or data processor that is processing personal data of particular value or significant to the economy, society, or security. My attention for the first time went through to when data are significant to the economy, data are significant to the society, and data are significant to society or security. So I reasoned that in many facets, and one of the ways I looked at it, I see it from the perspective of processing data that are significant to the society or a community of people, in the country, and the processing of this data is such that would, affect the perception of the general public about this group of people, especially where there are no, other data to confirm the, how the legitimacy of the, of the data that is, being processed. I also looked at it at the, also had motivation from the, cost of subscription for API tools and the currency equivalents in Africa, especially looking at, in Nigeria, the comparison of dollar rates to Naira rates and how it is the affordability of these two to people, And then I also had motivation from the diversity of Africa's cultural heritage and digital representation. And then the last thing that motivated me is the limited material or resources on the subject. But let us still look at the question of indigenous data sovereignty versus data sovereignty. First of all, the question of sovereignty, first start with, the ability of, I look at it first of all from the country perspective or a nation perspective, how a nation is able to control or to rule its affair, against external interference, avoiding external interference, into the runnings of the nation. So I try to balance the both concept, which is data sovereignty and also indigenous data sovereignty. By the way, indigenous data sovereignty is really not a new concept. It's been on since, I think, 2017 thereabouts. Indigenous data sovereignty has been defined as the rights of indigenous people to own, control, access, possess data that is derived from them and which pertains to their member, knowledge system, custom, or territory. Now, looking at this from what the previous slide that I shared, especially on the, data processor of major importance. So I see 4 key things here, right? The 4 key things, first starting from the ownership, the control, the access, and to possess. Now, these 4 things are very significant towards talking about this particular topic. Now, data sovereignty refers to the principle that digital data is subject to the laws and governance structure of the country, which is collected, stored, or processed. This concept emphasizes that data should be managed and protected according to the legal and regulatory framework of the nation where it resides. So you see that the bold principle, have significance. The first relating to a nation, and the indigenous, which is the second, relating to a particular group or a niche in the nation. Now, this underscores the, from these 2 perspectives, would see that it's the burden is laid upon the states, especially when it comes to, first of all, starting from data sovereignty, to make regulations that enforces the dominance or the residency, of data, within a territory, especially data that relates to indigenous, people. And I also see that within 4 years, we've seen that the Supreme Court of Canada, have decided 5 major cases, relevant to indigenous data sovereignty. And in all these cases, they've shed light on the duty to consult with regards to development projects impacting indigenous people. Now, these particular decisions were just based on the right of indigenous people on their data, and these are not even moved to the modeling of algorithms, especially when modeling data for indigenous people. Now, the question of consultation of indigenous people is a very difficult process while modeling algorithm, as vast data are secured from the internet. Now, the issue here, as to the what I emphasized earlier on the question of consultation, would see that, if we are looking at consulting people, especially on their indigenous people, on their rights, you would look at the difficulty or near impossibility to be able to consult these people on the question of data. Okay, if we are saying that indigenous people should own their data, should control their data, to access the data, and to process data. What this comes to my mind is looking at it from, approaching it from a jurisprudential approach, right? Like a legal philosophy. We know that because I had to look at, several data protection regulation, and I see that the question of data protection regulation has to do with personal data. Now, I also looked at it from the right to privacy because, all data protection regulations, is a flow from a constitutional right that gives a right to privacy, and a right can only be a right when it is bestowed by any legal instruments, right? And so I see that when we are referring to indigenous indigenous languages, indigenous data, I see that it's now falls. It might likely fall under category of properties, right? Categories of properties and properties that belong to a particular person, which means that I looked at it also from the question or the legal philosophy of ownership. Now, many philosophers have postulated a lot of theories on ownership that I feel that would really be essential. Looking at the rights of the rights of indigenous communities, especially to own, to control, to access, to process their data. Now, indigenous data can be categorized under the incorporeal ownership. By incorporeal, it could either be intellectual property, trademark, encryption, anonymized data, copyright, and so on. Now, I'm driving. We will get there. Now, according to Wesley H. Onfield, ownership consists of the right of using the thing, the right of excluding others from using it, the right to dispose of the thing, and the right to destruction of the thing. Now, this works when this is more practicable when we are referring to chattel, ownable chattel, like house, like a bag, a laptop. But how practicable? What's the practicality of data ownership, especially data that are not in the possession of the data subject? Because we have to distinguish between ownership and possession. So ownership can be under the possession of the data subject, but possession, the fact that there is possession does not, warrant the ownership of that. And these are just, legal philosophy on ownership. If we are considering, and these are jurisprudential approach to ownership. Now, from these, I look at it also, from the jurisprudential approach of ownership. The summary we could see is first, right to possess, right to use, right to manage, and right to income. Now, these are what would conclude from a jurisprudential approach of ownership. So, if this works with chattel and other form of incorporeal chattels, how do we relate these to data, especially data that are undergoing several phases of modeling, especially when are going to either the pre-modeling stage, or you're going to the modeling stage, or even deployment or post-deployment stage. How do you tend to infuse this to ownership, especially those that relate to indigenous communities that are not in their possession? And also, we need to know that when it comes to indigenous community, the knowledge from indigenous community are usually passed from generation to generation, and this knowledge are such that are unique just to them alone. So would we say that, and these are just questions that just got me thinking, would we say that the fact that a particular data, and we also need to know that most of the people in these indigenous communities are people that are not learned enough in most communities are not learned enough to, you know, to put this information on the internet. And other things that another, phase of this conversation is to look at the companies' modeling algorithms, how they are able to access this data. We know that these companies, they did not go, how they were able to process the data. Basically, majority are from, scrapped data on the internet. Okay, so the key principles of indigenous data governance, similar to indigenous data sovereignty, would be ownership. Indigenous community have legal and moral right to own their data. The control, communities dictate how their data is allocated, used, and shared. The access and the possession. So ownership, control, access, and possession. But we are still driving towards the practicability of these when modeling an algorithm, especially going through the several phases of modeling. Now, in all these things that we are talking about, here are the dilemma in this conversation. Now, the first thing is that algorithm modeling process is costly. Indigenous people are typically minority and can be poorer than the surrounding settlers, holds an important implication for data sovereignty. So if we are saying that indigenous people should, if we're considering the sovereignty of data of indigenous people, processing modeling algorithms are costlier, because it's warrants buying a lot of, expensive GPUs, and the most communities do not even have what it takes to generate computational power, to model this algorithm. Number two is, identifying indigenous people might be difficult, might be a difficult process, right? As minority have settled for what I'll call as greener pastures. So most, even if my minority have not settled for a greener pasture, you know that it would be difficult to identify which data are indigenous and which data are not indigenous, especially after an algorithm when the community are not part of the process of modeling the algorithm. So how would the companies that are modeling algorithms, how would they know that these algorithms are for indigenous people and these algorithms, the others, are marked as non-indigenous people? Another dilemma, especially that relates to principle of data governance, right, would be consent. And consent can only be withdrawn in the existence of such data. Consent can only be withdrawn if the existence of such data is within the knowledge of the data subject. The existence of indigenous data in an algorithm might be outside the knowledge of indigenous people. So how do indigenous communities, how do they exercise their right of ownership? Because we say that ownership is such that the person, the owner, can even destroy the chattel. So, and before an indigenous community can exercise their right to consent or their right to ownership, or even content, they must have the knowledge of the existence, of such data in the model. And how will they, know of the existence of such data? Now, withdrawal of consent of data resident in an algorithm can be almost an impossible, process. And yes, it can be because we know that part of the principle, that is established in personal data protection regulations is the question of consent, and the fact that a data subject can withdraw consent at any given time, while the data processor or data controller is, processing such data. Now, for us to be able to understand the question of, indigenous data sovereignty, especially when it comes to algorithm, is we have to ask ourselves the question: what exactly inspires modeling governance? Because this will determine the level of how Indigenous people are able to exercise their rights of ownership, control, and access to their data, especially those that are likely to occasion, bias, within them. First of all, I look at one of the things that inspires modeling governance is, jurisdictional regulatory framework. And this is really important. This is really important because in the absence of a jurisdictional regulatory framework, it is a bit difficult to talk about modeling governance. And this jurisdictional regulatory framework is divided to, first of all, a general provision on data protection. And secondly, it also borders around a sectorial provisions of protection of the particular tool. Let's say, for instance, what I mean by sectoral provisions would be subject around, let's say, an algorithm for health, regulations on the health sector would be what would motivate or what would inspire or what would control such model. Now, in all these two, we see that from what I have checked from my research, I see that most, especially from the African perspective, most of this regulation, either cross-sectoral regulation or cross-sectoral regulations, or those that are general, have their peculiarities in just protecting the sectors, and it does not really speak directly to Indigenous people or Indigenous community or even their data. It just speaks directly to that particular sector. The other things that you would see, that inspires Indigenous modeling governance, or that inspires modeling governance, is corporate governance policies and philosophy. Now, the fact is this: the product of a company is governed by the policies that are present in the company. So, if and one of the ways you could actually see this is, which I also did, is going through the publicly available document of a company, either in terms of use, privacy policy, terms of service. There you can you'll be able to understand what exactly is governing, their policies, governing what they do and how their model would work. So corporate governance, inherent in the company, or even their philosophies, tend to govern it. And one of the things you'd also look at is that a company that does not, a person, either persons in the C-level, executive, that would I target as unethical, would likely would likely constitute an unethical company, and an unethical company would definitely build an unethical product. So corporate governance, has a major influence when it comes to modeling governance and how, the company processes data of several categories of people and their reactions towards such data. The other things you would see is ethical frameworks. Now, why I put ethical framework as the third here is because it's likely we like target in quote as the weaker level in this, because ethical frameworks, as we have, international, international principles, international organizations, dictating, providing principles for AI ethics, we see that these principles are rather subjective. They are suggestive in nature, and there is no form of enforcement or compliance So it's a bit difficult, and it's a bit difficult to hold, to sanction a company that have not, adopted ethics, because it is rather, will I call it, prescriptive, right? And nothing. It's not regulatory in nature. Let me put it that way. Okay. Other things I also looked at is while trying to, get this done, because I had gone through several, a lot of brainstorming just to, and then read through a lot of literatures just to look at the practicality of indigenous data sovereignty, especially when it comes to algorithm modeling, especially looking at the question of corporate governance policies and philosophy. So what I did was that I generated keywords, word cloud that are related to indigenous people or indigenous community, and I put these keywords, individually on the privacy policy of 10 companies, of 10 top AI companies. And I see that one of the things I see so much present, I didn't add it to this slide, was data, legal, compliance, framework, but you see questions on in indigenous, border, residency, they were missing in it, which means that either nobody have raised, the question of, indigenous data, or they are just, they have not seen any need, to consider these people, in the modeling. And in conclusion, I would say that modeling data as scrapped from the internet, addressing indigenous data sovereignty in algorithm modeling starts from the data provided on the internet. It underscores the roles of leaders, civil groups, and NGOs of indigenous communities to take proactive steps to ensure equity in representation. Because most of data scientists, AI engineers are not even, aware of the need to enforce, to implement indigenous data sovereignty. They've not seen, because nobody has raised it up, right? Especially in this part of the world. I know that, in Canada, just as I've showed earlier, Canada, Australia, there is a strong influence, there is a strong movement on enforcing indigenous rights, indigenous control, indigenous knowledge. But when it comes to this aspect of the world, it's something that is very, very silent. So companies might not see the need to ensure, indigenous data sovereignty until there is a voice on it. The next thing is that it might be difficult to categorically identify indigenous people while modeling algorithms. AI companies must make plans for inclusion through corporate and data governance policy. And one of the ways you could know, as I've mentioned earlier, to know of a company's plan for indigenous communities is to look through their publicly available documents and see if there is actually considerations of indigenous communities in the documents. This conclusion might be have a double side, which is human in the loop at every phase of modeling, which with adequate feedback mechanism, which should be an easy to access for model improvements. Yeah, so one of the things that would really help when it comes to improving model for indigenous communities is to get feedbacks on the model, feedbacks on the prompts, the output prompt and see what exactly is the biases that are present for indigenous people, and what could be done to ensure that these people are well represented and they have access and control over the use of their data. I also look at, as conclusion, I also look at it provided that equity of access and benefit in data stewardship that relates to indigenous communities. So if it will be difficult for indigenous communities to have full access over their data, I see that what could, as a suggestion, which I am still considering the feasibility of this, is equity of access and benefits, where you are able to balance your needs versus the needs of the indigenous community, and seeing the data of the indigenous community as seeing a data controller as a data steward, and making equitable provisions for the communities which their data are being processed. And thank you. That is it from me. I look forward to feedbacks, look forward to questions and observations and comments on this particular work. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Kingsley. So next we have another speaker, and then we'll have you both for questions after she speaks. So next we have Favour Borokini, who is a PhD student with the Horizon Center for Doctoral Training, hosted at the Faculty of Computer Science at the University of Nottingham, where she researches an ethical framework to address harms in immersive environments. She holds a law degree from the University of Benin, Nigeria, and is a member of the Nigerian Bar. In the past, she worked in several technological policy and research roles, where she leveraged her legal training to investigate the impact of technology on human rights, and particularly women's rights. At her previous organization, Policy, she led groundbreaking research cataloging the impact of AI on African women and the experiences of African women working in AI across various sectors.
Thank you. I will put my mask back on when I'm done presenting. Okay. Sorry. I am trying to do okay. Hi everyone. My name is Favour Borokini, and I'm a PhD student at the University of Nottingham, researching Afrofeminist ethics concerns in the design and use of avatars. And today I'll be talking about human subjectivities and how they interact with, how human subjectivities and mediating technologies interact. So I'm talking about Georg-Simmel, taste and authenticity, the necessity of a critical AI ethics approach, or clashes in the axis of positionality, and post-phenomenology and AI-generated media. So recently, on Twitter and real life, I found that when people refer to AI-generated images specifically, not just images, but also words, people are beginning to use words like pollution and slop, and I think it's very easy to understand why and how, but I find these two words in particular rather provocative, and I hope to talk about why it's unhelpful in certain contexts to use to describe AI-generated media. So we're talking about AI-generated images specifically, and not just images, text as well. Certain ethical considerations worth looking at include the fact that creatives are underpaid, undervalued, and overworked, and where somebody, an artist or a creative, is creating something and they're not being adequately compensated for it, and you find that someone else is taking out of that work, it's very easy to see why this is theft or piracy. And then, of course, if you are not being compensated for work that you are doing, it's unlikely that you are motivated or stimulated or incentivized to create even more. But then also, if we're looking at the outputs created by LLMs and image-generating technologies, we find that there is a sort of flattening going on. A lot of the content being outputted is quite uniform. They all look rather the same. And, well, this is my position. This is still how I think about AI-generated media. But sometime last year, I noticed something happening on WhatsApp involving a lot of my friends and family on their WhatsApp status. So before I continue, I want to play this video. I don't know. No, back. It's not playing. How do I play the video? Click. What do I click on? Again? No. Anyway, this is my WhatsApp. Yeah, okay, yes, you can see it now. This is my WhatsApp video reel, and you can see it's quite active. I've blurred out the names of people on my contacts, and you can see people I'm fighting with who I have muted because I don't wish to see what they are talking about. And that is my own WhatsApp status feed. I post screenshots from books I'm reading, commentary on stuff that has happened to me in my daily life, and it's how I and lots of people I've grown up with communicate on WhatsApp. I find that lots of people I've met abroad, outside Nigeria even, don't even use WhatsApp, their WhatsApp status at all. They're usually surprised to see that I am posting anything on it. Sometimes they don't even look at it, and I just feel like when I post on my WhatsApp status, I'm sort of doing it for attention. I want eyes on it because I want feedback, and it's some sort of a culture shock to me when I realize that this isn't how people use WhatsApp outside Nigeria. And so that's my brother, and he was one of the people I noticed who posted these AI-generated images on WhatsApp. And when I saw these images, I was quite concerned and confused about why. I suppose if you've grown up consuming media in a particular way, Hollywood movies, you sort of feel a lot of affinity with these images, with American culture in a way. And I wondered if that was what was happening. So I asked him, and he said that, I asked him to take a couple of pictures from our family album, because I wanted to, I suppose due to homesickness, I think. And then he said that it was while he was creating those images that he saw this AI feature and he decided to try it. And he said he enjoyed the process and the outcome, that he was surprised that he actually turned to a white person, but that overall he thought it was a good experience. And then I asked him what he liked. He said it brought different images of me. They were interesting because that's the first time I was turned into something like that. So I asked somebody else, an older sister of my friend, who also I saw create AI-generated images of herself. And she said she had seen other people do the same, and she wanted to see what it would look like if it was her. And she said she thought it was fun, and that she enjoyed seeing herself in different personalities and scenarios. She said she found the range of art actually surprising, but that the perfections were unsurprising. She said she wished she didn't have extra fingers. Then I asked a friend of mine who I went to law school with at the same time, and she said she too had also seen other people doing it and wanted to do it. She said she created some for her child. She has a daughter, and her husband as well. She said she was quite surprised that all the images were able to replicate her facial features, and that the resemblance was quite striking. She wasn't surprised by the contorted hands, ears, or legs, because technology can never be 100%. She said her concerns were that those contorted parts made her look abnormal or like an alien. So now let's talk about post-phenomenology, and I'm not really going to talk about affordance theory, but they are very closely related. So what is post-phenomenology? I define post-phenomenology as the most amazing philosophy of science and technology you've never heard of, because I feel like I can count on one hand the number of people I have spoken with who actually knew what it was. And I use this image to illustrate post-phenomenology because I feel that when we talk about technologies, people often default to digital technologies. But Donaidi, who is the guy who coined the term, he passed away in January. I guess for Donaidi, a technology is any artifact that is wrought by human hands. So when we think about food, because I like food also, this image particularly spoke to me because, well, in my own, growing up in Nigeria, I can see, these are bamboo steamers. They are used to steam food. And when I think about foods that I grew up eating, like moi moi and eko, and there are meals that are either served or prepared in leaves. And I thought it was interesting that this was also something that existed in Asian cultures as well. And I feel like it speaks to human ingenuity, the development of a particular recipe of a meal, the development of bamboo steamers to steam, to bring all these meals together. I think it's really impressive, and it's something that it's worth thinking about. So, post-phenomenology explores the relationship between individuals and the world as one shaped by technological artifacts. And it's the analysis, or an analysis, of the role played by specific technologies in specific contexts. For post-phenomenologists, technologies are neither wholly neutral nor wholly deterministic. So the idea, for instance, would say that technologies are non-neutral. Not that they are neutral, or that, because, well, technologies are designed in certain contexts. Their designers and their users appropriate their uses and their creation for certain ends. So they are not entirely, like, they did not spontaneously erupt, but they lack agency, and so you cannot say that a technology is culpable per se. So they are non-neutral. And then artifacts mediate and co-constitute reality. I think this is my favorite part of post-phenomenological analysis, the idea that technologies are active shapers of the way we view our world. So if I wear dark shades, for instance, the world that I look at will be a dark world, will be dark tinted, because I'm looking at it through a particular pair of glasses that have been designed to look this way. So, so I want to talk a bit about my own personal experience with media consumption. And Passport to Paris was probably the first movie that I watched growing up. I don't recall if I ever watched one movie I watched before I saw Passport to Paris, but it's the oldest one that I remember watching. And when I was in secondary school, I watched Merlin. One of my classmates in SS1, that was my first year in secondary school, smuggled a DVD player thing, and we watched Merlin. That's when I watched for the first time. And then every holiday, when we would come back, we would talk about the latest season and what would happen next and all that. And then when I graduated from secondary school, my parents gave me a small Nokia phone, and I was using that I love fantasy novels and romance. I primarily just read fantasy and romance. But, so I would Google readfreebooksonline.com, and many websites would come out, and I would visit each of these websites and read novels and lots of series. I suppose I didn't realize that this was piracy until when I got a bigger phone, and I wanted to actually be able to download files by myself, for myself, and not rely on unreliable internet in Nigeria. I wanted files that I could read at any time. And then while searching for these websites, I eventually stumbled on some forums where people were talking about piracy in certain parts of the world. And so that's how I discovered that that's actually piracy. And Merlin, I think, it was shown on a BBC channel. And I don't think the roadside shops, my mom bought Passport to Paris, and the other Mary-Kate and Ashley Olsen movies I watched, or any of the movies I grew up watching, were licensed distributors. So I began to feel like I was being rather hypocritical when, in the way I talked about AI-generated media, being somebody myself who, well, still sort of sails the high seas when it comes to certain media. I feel that in many cases, Nigeria, let's say Africa, but I would say maybe excluding South Africa, because you guys are really enjoying here, South Africa and North Africa, the rest of us are still, digitally excluded in many ways. Banks, debit cards issued by Nigerian banks, for instance, cannot be used to actually buy or access, buy any of these very many digital products. There are geographical, restrictions from purchases and users. You can't even access certain websites if your IP address is located in Nigeria. I say that this service is not available in your location. And so you wonder, oh, why do people pirate? Because even when you have the money, as I did when I began to work, you can't even legally access these services. And of course, when you don't have the money, you can't access it anyway. So there are still those elements of exclusion and segregation. And I suppose who doesn't want to broaden their mind, who doesn't want to enjoy culture, be a part of something globally significant and enjoyable? And so when I think about slop, I feel like, I'm not sure if slop refers to, well, pigs and slop, or it refers to, food, like stereotypes that people say about British food being slop. No, British food is actually quite nice. Some of it is actually quite nice. Yeah. Not all of it is like this. But I feel like a lot of the African experience is actually, well, slop. When I was growing up, my mom would buy me and my siblings secondhand clothes, and these were clothes from, Europe and North America. My mom would say that secondhand clothes are actually of better quality than new clothes. I'm not sure. I'm not sure she was trying to make us feel better, or I guess there's some truth to it that some of these items are actually of better make than some of the fast fashion articles. But it's still that experience, right? And then the movies that we watched were, from abroad, even the books. When we eventually got satellite TV, we first got My TV Africa, and then Go TV, which is like DSTV Lite. I started watching much more foreign media. But then I eventually realized that some of the movies that I was watching were decades old. So I'd be watching, I remember Shia LaBeouf, because I watched Even Stevens. And then, imagine my surprise when one of the few times when I actually got a proper phone, I was Googling Shia LaBeouf, and discovered that Even Stevens is actually a very, very, very old TV show. It's like from the 90s, I think. And this summarize my media experience. And you'd find, I suppose I want to take a moment to reflect on the impact on the values that many families like mine cultivated when the values we're absorbing from the West and about the West were decades old, and what that means. And so the criticism of a certain thing, of an experience, of creation of a thing as slop is both, I find it both insulting and not insulting. Insulting because anything that is slop is non-quality, but also not insulting because, well, what else is there, right? It's just what you consume to live and be happy and exist. So I wonder if this one will play. So I was just thinking about, well, that was just a clip from Peter Pan about the life of a pirate and what it means. And I don't mean to be smug or annoying about the fact that I and many people like myself, essentially pirate media for our own consumption. But so I want to talk about some of the qualities of the AI-generated media that I observed. So the content I was seeing on people's WhatsApp status updates were intimate. So people were talking about themselves. They were creating images about themselves. People shared pictures of themselves wearing beautiful gowns and in fancy studios. There's a lady I know who is a lawyer, but who is a hairdresser now. She only makes natural hair. And She runs a business training women to set up small businesses. And she created this image of herself wearing human hair in a suit. And essentially she was saying, you don't need to, it doesn't matter that you can't afford to go to a studio to get a professional picture. With AI, you can generate an image of yourself in a suit, looking professional and wearing makeup. And I saw somebody posted a picture of herself looking much younger, and she said, oh, this was what I looked like 10 years ago. I wonder if I can lose this amount of weight and look like this again. And I thought that it was quite intimate and expressive and quite personal. And I suppose I felt quite privileged to see people talk about these things about themselves. And then the second thing about it is the platform, right? When you post on your WhatsApp status, it disappears after 24 hours. And it's restricted to your friends and people on your contact list. So it's, people are posting private things about themselves on a platform that is highly curated, in which they know the people who are viewing it. And I feel like that sort of content is different from stuff like this, for instance. How do I play this video? Do I just... So this is an AI-generated video of Lagos in 2056 using, Sora. And the person who posted it on Twitter was actually gushing about how, detailed it was. I feel like I know somebody who looks like that guy in real life even. But I was quite unimpressed by it because it's 2056, but you can still see that there's a lot of poverty in Lagos, overcrowding, traffic. Lagos 2056 ought to be much better than Lagos 2024. And I do not find this to be impressive at all. And then there's also this, I don't know what this is. This is one of those Facebook slop images. It's very disturbing. And then these ones were images that I created when I started my research last year, and I typed a black model sitting by the pool. And this was what it spit out at me, an image of black model sitting by the pool. So I suppose I feel that there are huge distinctions between what is happening in these two settings. And so I feel like when I think about ethics, because I've been working in AI ethics for quite a while, actually. I think that certain things, ethics refers to how we articulate what is right or what is wrong. And what is right and what is wrong is highly contextual. And if you talk about, my favorite example is police brutality in the US, which is, there's a lot of police brutality deployed against black people in the US. There's also a lot of police brutality in Nigeria, but the causes are different. In Nigeria, police brutality is facilitated on the basis of ethnicity, on the basis of age, and on the basis of class. Not that there isn't any racial component to it, because our police force was set up during the colonial era, and where they would bring in police recruits from the north into the south to police southerners and vice versa. But it's sort of a different context. And then we'll talk about AI ride-hailing apps, for instance. Well, there's a lot of talk about how these apps disempower drivers, for instance. But I think about the example of a Nigerian man who, while he lived in Nigeria, was a doctor, and he immigrated to Canada for greener pastures. And while there, he's unable to practice medicine because, the Canadian medical guidelines do not permit medical personnel from certain parts of the world to practice medicine. And he's trying to find a job, and then one of the most accessible types of jobs they can find are delivery jobs, like with delivery companies like Deliveroo and Uber, and he's able to do this job because of something like Google Maps, because these companies have, mined and created these huge data points about roads in the city. And as a result of this, he's able to appropriate this for, to make a living, to provide for his family. And so I feel like, well, what is ethics in his own, for this man? Is it ethical for him to just not do or take up jobs that are available to him because well, I suppose there is an existing problem with drivers being disenfranchised, disempowered. And then when we talk about taste as well, when we talk about taste, of course, we are referring to something cultivated. Nobody calls people who just like to eat a lot, like me, sort of, as having cultivated taste. Taste refers to something selective, right? You have to put in a lot of investment, time, money. It has to be authentic. And I really struggle with the word authentic and authenticity. In my research, I critique it a lot because it's actually rather problematic. It's not of the great unwashed. And I see this a lot when people talk about AI-generated images. People say that they are not art, they are not authentic, you haven't put any time into it. But it's not a problem that, people don't have that problem with photographs, for instance. I still feel like I'm not entirely sure what the distinction is between pictures that you take with your camera and AI-generated images. There are different distinctions, but when it comes to effort, I don't think effort is the signifier, because what effort have you, so I feel like nothing encapsulates this more than Delfgate, which happened in April when Paul Graham said somebody sent him an email with the word delve, and he automatically knew that that email must be AI-generated because delve is an AI word. And that was just so weird. And the funny thing is that this guy actually funds AI startups, so I don't know what his problem was exactly. So it's just for rules for D and not for me. You people can use AI to write your text, but you can't use that for me, or whatever it was referring to. So this is my final slide, and I'm asking, what is justice? I wonder if justice doesn't require or involve some sort of plurality, some sort of recognition of the fact that many different contexts exist that constantly clash with each other, such that what is justice for this person might not be justice for another person, even though on the surface their situations are different. Talk about equity in law. Equity requires that judges take into consideration that just because the facts of a case are similar doesn't mean that if the law is uniformly applied to them that you get justice in all these cases. And then that justice and inclusion is messy. And in my second workshop for my research, I was speaking with designers and users of immersive technologies and avatars to talk about ethics. And somebody shared this very funny example about cakes, well, specifically vagina cakes. So she said she went to an event for vaginas, and there were black vagina cakes and white vagina cakes. But what happened was that people only ate the white vagina cakes and left the black ones on the table. And I suppose you can imagine why. Nobody wants to be seen eating a black vagina cake in public or something. But well, what happened was that by choosing to do the right thing, the appropriate thing, I guess people inadvertently illustrated the fact that the right thing isn't always, I don't know, just, doesn't always provide, doesn't always mean inclusion. So justice and inclusion is messy, I suppose. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
So Kath was going to be respondent for these two amazing papers, but as a result of her not feeling well enough, Rachel kindly agreed to moderate. I'll be foolish enough to try to provide a kind of a take it or leave it response, completely off the cuff, before opening things up to the floor under Rachel's guidance. So I thought that these were terrific papers, and I personally would love to know more from Kingsley about what kind of, quote, human in the loop he imagines might be up to the task of resolving this tension that he articulated between the need to enable indigenous data to be, quote unquote, included in some sense in data sets for modeling, and the need for such people to be able to exert sovereignty over their data and how it is used, or perhaps even how it is not used. He gave us a very deep sense of the different tensions, jurisprudential, ethical, etc. And then human in the loop was introduced in a way that I think was intended to be the vehicle through which participation of some kind becomes a means of constituting the sovereign indigenous subject. So I'd love to hear more about that. Favour's presentation was sort of took us outside of that type of jurisprudential look at how people who have voluntarily joined one another in something like a social media app are using something like AI-generated systems to represent themselves, so to speak. She introduced a potential post-phenomenological theoretical approach as a way of mediating that, and I'd be delighted to hear more about it. Just as interestingly, though, she introduced these categories that I myself associate with Pierre Bourdieu's work on distinction, to describe how it is that when we make judgments about AI-generated material, calling it slop and other things in order to denigrate it on behalf of human artists, human musicians, human writers, whom at least some of us feel we have to protect against the injustices through the very lack of jurisprudential regulation of the kind in Kingsley's talk, need those kinds of protections. So in other words, people denigrate AI-generated content, but what Favour, I think, has brilliantly noticed is the way it makes her feel to see these AI-generated contents dismissed as inauthentic, as not truly artistic, as not meaningful, and not just. The way that it comes back onto any one of us, but especially the way Favour herself feels about how her own sort of cultural habitus was not formed in a way that that made it easy for her to imagine herself as a fully empowered judge of the authentic and the artistic, because of her having to have engaged in forms of piracy, in forms of the discarded, And so we're asked to think about how to mediate these tensions, these paradoxes between, aesthetic categories that in some ways for a long time we tried to distance ourselves from. Even beginning in the late 19th century, people began to distance themselves from these ideas of, what was the authentic. Certainly, postmodernism is a lot about questioning the authentic. So categories that for a long time prior to AI systems per se being the thing that we were contending with in the political economy and in the socio-technical economy, categories that we were already distancing from. And I think that Favour really gave us a strong present-day sense of how that works, as someone from Nigeria looking at WhatsApp as her friends make themselves younger, thinner, more professional, and whatnot, but also, deal with media like, Lagos in 2056 being a hot mess pastiche of Lagos in 2024. So both papers were so great in identifying tensions, and I so much look forward to this conversation, and I hope this has been helpful.
Would either of you like to respond to what Lauren just shared with us, or would we like to open it up for questions? Do you have anything to add? You don't? Okay. All right. So something that Lauren and I talked about before we met was also just to hopefully keep things to time so that we can wrap at 12. We were just discussing if you have a question for both people, maybe just think about which speaker you'd really like to ask a question to, ask that one question so that everybody, as many people as want to participate can. Is there anyone who'd like to open us up with a question? It's all Harry first.
Thank you for this presentation, Favour. I just want to share. I want to hear your thoughts on going back to the Lagos video, Lagos 2056. So before here, I spent a month in Cameroon, and when you come from other parts of Africa to here, the comment is, "Hey, it's just like Europe." And in a way, is there any way to do Afrofuturism that does not, if this Afro in Afrofuturism, and if the main denominator for what people see as Afro is, those crowded streets and all that, is there any way for a creator, even an AI, to come up with an Afrofuturistic scene that wouldn't have those things that you're uncomfortable with if we define Afro as that? And if we step out of that, are we just becoming Cameroonians who say, hey, it's just like Europe? So, yeah.
Thank you. Yes, I also take issue with Afrofuturism. I feel like I'm always critiquing everything, but I know that Nnedi Okorafor, for instance, who she makes a distinction between Afrofuturism and African futurism. On the terms that African futurism, Africa futurism refers to works of literature, I suppose, and arts that come from a specifically African continental perspective, rather than one that is mainly dominated by Afro-diasporan imaginations and imaginaries about what it means to be of African descent. I don't think that artificial intelligence can actually create, Lagos 2056 videos or stuff like that, that I suppose that are radical enough, that do not draw on what already exists. And I think that that is the flaw of these systems that we need to be aware of, that they can't help us imagine, well, they can help us imagine in the sense that they can provoke you to imagine something by yourself. But since they are drawing on existing data about what exists, then they are limited by the data that already exists. And so to imagine something radically different, I think would require, well, a human imagination rather than technological imagination. So I think that that is the problem specifically. I wouldn't rely on AI to imagine Lagos 2056 because I don't think AI can imagine adequately well enough for me.
Thank you. Wes?
Yeah, this question is for Kingsley. In this idea of like data sovereignty or data ownership, when you refer to indigenous communities having, say, data ownership, do you have any examples of any type of community that actually has data ownership? And then how is that expressed with that ownership based on benefits or being able to have sovereignty over data?
Okay, thank you very much for the question. On the question of indigenous ownership and exercising their sovereignty. So what's from what I have been researching and checking about, especially on the question of, first of all, indigenous ownership before, going to exercising sovereignty over it is, there has been, currently I have not seen any. There have been little participation, on indigenous sovereignty. One of the things that I have just discovered is, international organization, collaborating together to form alliances just to ensure that, there are indigenous sovereignty. And one of them would see is, which I'm sure we would be aware of, is the Global Initiative for Data Alliance, the GIDA, where they made a care principle that helps for, a fair data ownership principle that is findable, accessible, interpretable, and also reusable. But all in all, what I've observed is all these things are actually things that are rather in principle, and now that we are transitioning into processing of data with AIs and algorithms, I see that in coming days, it's things that would take serious shape, and that is why I am much interested in it. The other alliances on this is the RDA, the Research Data Alliance. All these groups are actually working to ensure that this indigenous, the principle of indigenous data governance, ownership specifically, is effective. There are also countries that are, that are releasing guidelines. Countries releasing guidelines on this. You see, Australia, New Zealand, Canada. Even in the United States, you see, principles just coming up to ensure that these things are really things that are visible. But in practice, I see that it's really a term that is still emerging, and in the coming days, I believe, and that is why I am more interested in it, seeing that these things are really effective, especially when it comes to, algorithm modeling. And why am I really interested in algorithm modeling? Because we see that all these things have the possibilities of breeding some form of discrimination. So if I am in the US and if I'm in Nigeria, I am using an algorithm, a model, probably ChatGPT, to ask about some indigenous thing, about the existence of a country, of some people in a particular location. I would take what the model is saying, and with what the model is saying, if I am not so knowledgeable of the workings of an AI, I would believe all those things. And there's likelihood that I would relate to those people based on what I have heard or what I've read, which most likely are not even verified. So these principles are things that I believe are emerging, and in coming days would really see them, coming into play.
Thank you. We have one question from the Zoom, so I'll read that. It's to Favour. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on how the input for generative AI could impact how authentic and proprietary the outcome is. If AI is used to enhance and/or combine existing images or art to create professional image or enhance art, does this generate something that is more authentic than an image generated from scratch? And what differentiates a Photoshop edited image from an AI edited image?
Okay, well, I think that what it sort of boils down to, I think this comes down again to how we define authenticity. So from my research, my reading of how, I suppose, Western thinkers, I guess, have thought about authenticity as greatly varied. If you trace the trajectory of sincerity, which refers to a state of individual identity expression in which an individual's identity derives from their family. So if you are born into a family of lawyers or blacksmiths or what other professions are there, bakers, then naturally you'll be expected to take up the family business. That will be defined as you being sincerely taking up a role. But due to modernity, industrialization, people became sort of displaced from their locales. So it was no longer enough or feasible for people to remain in their small villages and take up the roles of the good daughter, the good wife, the good mother, the good father. People began to leave their villages for the city. And in order to to redefine what it means for them to be human, to be an individual. And then authenticity as a means of identifying what it means to an individual. This is where authenticity then comes into play, because it refers to, faced with all these disembedding, features, elements. It is important for an individual to be able to look within, to identify what it is about themselves that makes them special and unique, and projects this identity as something authentic. So authenticity refers to, something that is non-replicable, something that is special. But of course, there are flaws with authenticity. When you see, for instance, young people seeking authentic expression by divesting from what their parents and older people require them to look like, you can still recognize an element of sameness in the way that young people all tend to look alike and dress alike, even though they believe that they are being radical. And the other flaws of, what can be authentic to somebody might be inauthentic to somebody else. Are you being authentic if you're a young woman and you are pregnant and you don't want to keep your pregnancy? Is it authenticity if you decide not to? Or are you being true to yourself if you decide to? So it's very, there isn't one way to describe a thing as authentic. So I think that, I'm not sure I would define, which is why I wouldn't define it per se as authentic, but I think, yes, it is. I think there's a difference between submitting an image of yourself, of your own face, into, on a website, and then requiring it to generate images of you, and there's a difference between you asking it to generate an image based on the work that other people have done without you giving it anything. I suppose it still ties into that element of, for something to be authentic, you have to invest something in it, you have to give something to it. But, and so I guess people who want to seek authenticity, who prioritize authenticity, might be able to live with or use AI generative image generation platforms by viewing it this way. But I guess, for me, when I saw those images, it wasn't really about authenticity. It was just about people instrumentalizing a particular tool to express themselves in a particular way. I don't think my friends and family were thinking about doing something authentic. Many of them actually said that they saw other people doing it. That's why they were doing it. But I don't think that renders it inauthentic. It's just, it has value, social value, because lots of people are doing it. But if you want to look at it from the point of view of authenticity, then I do think there's a distinction between you submitting something of yourself. I think that's the type of investment. You are training a big company's algorithm, of course. But yes, I think so.
Great, thank you. And then we had a question on the floor, Fumi.
Oh, geez, I have to remove my mask. I don't do well with talking into mask. Thank you so much, Favour. I was like, you were going on and on. I was like, yes, 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 yes. That was so refreshing. That's the word. So the Afrofeminist take or perspective that you offer in this presentation is very subtle. It's controversial, it's based on personal experiences, non-differential, unabashed. And it's very much like what I consider African feminism to look like, which is a term that I better go with. For instance, being an African feminist scholar, I also engage in piracy till date. And I see my own hypocrisy, thankfully, through your talk. But I don't exactly consider AI to be sloppy or pollution, because I believe pollution didn't start with AI, for instance. But much of what African feminism is exactly how you depict it. It is like an eye roll, I'm reading now, an eye roll at the hypocrisy of moral injunctions related to feminist approaches. It is a jab at authenticity, a stab here at radicalism, and it is often a thorough investigation of what on surface level looks moral and just. A classic example is African feminist take on, let's say, marriage, or like what you already described, issues of reproduction. While what would look normal and right and all that ethical on surface level is put forward, an African feminist take might be just very Janus-based, whereby it's like philosophical, neither here or there. But I think this is because while African feminism has this like eye roll at most of these issues, is because it has yet to be instilled with consciousness, like in its formation. And because of this, we have been unable to like mold an ethical framework for it. So it's still in this limbo space, this liminal space of cynicism. So what do you think instilling consciousness into African feminism, or Afrofeminism as you call it, will look like? I want to hear your take on this, because it seems you're on that good, though uncomfortable side of cynicism. So yes, what would it look like to finally, and I use the word finally because we have used the word African feminism, Afrofeminism a lot, but we have not exactly given it that moral, ethical framework and consciousness that it needs. And do you think AI can, maybe discussions, interactions with AI developments can do the work of pushing us to that boundary, or finally instilling consciousness into African feminism, Afrofeminism? And then, if you have time, you can also address the interaction of Afrofeminism with post-phenomenology. There's a lot to unpack there, and I would like to hear your take on that interaction, or what you think is the in-between of both concepts.
Okay, thank you. Yes, so, so last year I met somebody not, well, let me, okay. Well, I was talking to somebody about Americana, Chimamanda's novel, Americana. And he told me, he's Italian, and he told me that, well, his girlfriend told him that, well, he and his girlfriend were discussing Chimamanda, and they said that it seems like in Chimamanda's novels, she always ensures that her FMs, main characters, somehow find a way to capitulate to patriarchy. And in the context of Americana, I think he was referring to how Ifemelu still goes back to Obinze and all that. But that wasn't my reading of Americana. My reading of Americana was that Chimamanda is writing from a patriarchal environment, and she's making her female lead a bad woman, a woman who goes back to a man that she fell in love with as a child, and a man who, because of his love for his childhood love, leaves his wife and daughter for love. That's not an African narrative. A good man does not leave his wife and daughter. He can take up a mistress, but he never abandons his wife and family. And a good woman does not seek to, tempt a former lover who is married into pursuing an affair with her or abandoning his family. And so to me, that was, I took that as Afrofeminism, like as you said, something, an eye roll. It's rather cynical. It's not what is expected. It's not about what is expected or what is appropriate. Like if you think about Funmilayo Ransome Kuti, for instance, beating and deposing the king of, where is it? I've forgotten the name. Egba, yes. She was a major troublemaker. All the women stripping. How you find that in many Nigerian cultures, when women want to protest about a major injustice, they will strip themselves naked, and how that is considered an abomination for you to look upon a woman naked in that way, and how. But when you look at it from a Western lens, it's not that sort of, I suppose, nudity has sort of lost its. I don't know, provocativeness. What is so transgressive about it? And so I think that in my research, I think that Afrofeminism too can mean many different things, that there isn't one Afrofeminist approach, and that this is probably why there haven't been, actually I think that there are actually very many, but it's also why I am slowly steering away from developing an ethical framework, because I feel like there are so many, and every PhD student, at least in my university, is developing an ethical framework, and nobody ever reads all these things anyway, so I don't even know. Sometimes I feel very disillusioned about what I am doing, but one key characteristic, what I like about Afrofeminism, apart from the fact that I've been doing a lot of research that I've been describing as Afrofeminism and post-phenomenology, is that both of them are very practical. When I read Donaidi's books on culture and technology, he talks a lot about how many different cultures have designed many different types of technologies, cutlery, clothes, hunting, even hunting animals into extinction, and how all these things appear in many different cultures. And it just seems very practical and vivid. And I feel that something that is ethical and something that is Afrofeminist must also be practical. It's practical, and that I want to do research that shows the problems with eating black vagina cakes and that sort of thing. Something provocative that makes people think differently. That's what I'm trying to do. I don't know if I've figured it out yet, but it's my goal.
Thank you. All right, we have another question from the room.
Hi. Okay. Hi, Favour. Thank you for your presentation. I really like the framework of post-phenomenology that you're using. I'm also wondering, have you looked at French philosopher Bernard Stiegler's idea of techniques? When Stiegler talks about techniques as this human agency or having co-constituting technological frameworks. So it's kind of, Stigler points out that the cultural conditions and the context of power, social power, and kind of creates this kind of modes of kind of having agency over certain ways that we kind of frame our digital kind of context. So it's thinking about AI and AI-generated images, is that the question comes that is from the Stigler's point of view of techniques, that do we still have the agency kind of co-create those forms of images that might kind of affect our own way of reclaiming that power from technology. So that's the question, but it's post-phenomenological as the idea that co-constituting mediated images, that also comes in. But techniques that Stigler tries to give, kind of flip the framework of power towards the agency that we have in relation to tools that we are using. So it's also kind of, I think it's kind of a useful framework to kind of consider the thinking how these AI-generated images kind of producing certain ideas of justice or plurality in a sense, or is it, do we still have the agency to kind of radicalize and kind of create radical possibilities of kind of reclaiming those spaces of justice? And I think it's useful.
Thank you. I haven't engaged a lot with Stigler. I have seen his name come up in one article that I have read, but I haven't really read a lot about it. But I've seen the word techniques a lot in like science, technology, STS, let's call it STS, and philosophy. But I never really knew what the origin of. I wasn't aware of the origin of the word. So when it comes to agency, I feel like post-phenomenologists, since it comes from the pragmatist school of philosophy, they tend to, I don't know, I don't think pragmatists tend to critique, in that particular sense, power structures. I think they more like to talk about how they manifest themselves in hopes of somehow arriving at a solution. But this is something that I'm going to think about more. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for that presentation. I love listening to your insights and your research. I have very similar related research interests, but tend to focus on all the negative sides and the misuses of AI-generated images. And like in particular, the AI-generated child abuse, sexual abuse, and just like people misrepresenting others' identities. And what I found, like 2 points I found interesting, and I would love to hear you elaborate on, is a point you made about how it's kind of expressive for people to almost experiment with their representation of their identity to appear like with makeup or thinner, or these attributes that they want to represent themselves as, and what thoughts you have on the broader social and ethical implications of people being able to do that or participating in that kind of culture, and what that might mean for body image or for like mental health, especially for young girls. And the second point I would like to ask for you to elaborate on is, you talked about AI-generated images as being like a legitimate form of art. And I wonder how you reconcile the almost mass-scale theft of artists' work with this like generation of AI-generated art. And is it art if it's theft? And is it art if it's built upon the taking of material? Like maybe just elaborate on that.
Thank you. I think that your point about the ethics of people being able to make themselves thinner and with makeup and younger is problematic. I agree with you on that. And I do also myself think it is generally problematic. I feel like that the problematicness of such a display is vitiated by a couple of features of WhatsApp itself. The fact that those images only appear for like 24 hours and then they disappear. The fact also that most of the people who were sharing these images have largely stopped. I think they sort of grew bored with it. It seemed like a sort of toy that people had fun with. And you know, like when you buy a toy for a child and they can't just stop playing with it, and after a while they just forget about it. It feels like that. But in the meantime, I suppose while it went on, I just felt that I felt privileged to be able to see people say these things about themselves, especially considering I don't want to say caliber, or the type of people who I would ordinarily consider quite reserved, being able to say, I actually want to look like this. I think that itself is a type of freedom of expression that gives us something worth interrogating about the effects of body image, the way we view ourselves and all that. Also, there was something else I wanted to say. Okay, maybe if I remember it, I'll come back to it. Then your second question about art. Well, I feel like, I don't know if this is controversial. I feel like theft doesn't automatically mean a thing is no longer art. Like if I go to a museum and I steal the Mona Lisa, well, the Mona Lisa is still a piece of art, even if I have stolen it. Of course, I feel like the problem is that I do not have a right to own it. Not that what I now possess is not art. But that's one angle. Another angle is that I think that what we consider art is the construction of a thing as art is very political and not neutral. We say that something is artistic because we feel that and authentic because we have a creator has invested time in it. They've invested effort in its creation. Of course, I mean, part of the ways, a lot of the ways images are framed and displayed in museums draw upon the fact that the painter or the creator was tortured, they were going through something or the other, they were living in an attic, or there's just this framing of, suffering and an investment of time and effort in it. But I think I suppose I define art as something involving meaning, the creation of meaning, not necessarily beauty. A lot of modern art is quite ugly, but I think it's art. It's art because it's meaningful, it communicates something, but that something can be immoral. It can be, if you put a beautiful painting in a room surrounded by decay and feces, I think you are still making a statement about the conditions through which it has come into being. I actually read a chapter last week during the early days of photography, how people from all classes began to view photography as a way of communication, of identity tourism. So photographers in that time would have various props, and the author of the chapter said that her father, who was a dock worker, I think, went to take one of those pictures, and he wore a nice suit, his hair was neatly combed, it was powdered, and people would use these images as calling cards. And when I read it, I thought, oh, that's what these people were doing. That's what everybody was doing with this thing. It's a form of exploring what isn't, for fun, for professional advancement, to present yourself as something you are not. I think it's very human. But it's not moral, not completely moral. I think there's a lot to critique about it, but that it is something that has meaning and that can be examined from different perspectives. Yes, that's how I think.
Okay, we have one more question from the room for Kingsley. Are you still on?
Yeah, yeah, before I get to the question for Kingsley, I just want to start with a comment on Favour's nice paper. I really like the way you define technology, and to add a little bit to that is when people are like putting the pictures in the AI and want the AI to turn them thinner, more professional and so on, they are also participating in the building of that technology. So they are also participating in the making of the AI. So it's a collaborative process that is very interesting, because it seems like all of us who are using an AI, we are also making the technology, right? So that's one aspect. But when we look at it, we find that, like, to come back to the previous question about power, most of the power and ownership of those technologies relies in the hand of big companies, right? And when socially or digitally marginalized people are using this AI and participating to the making of that technology, I think it's also a way to reclaim part of that power. And that's when my question comes in for Kingsley, is how do you think this reclamation can lead to a form of ownership?
Okay, thank you very much for the question. The question of ownership is, the way I look at it, I see it in several levels, and several philosophies that would warrant it. The first side of it is, while there are principles of ownership, how do we justify ownership of data when a company has invested a whole lot of money and resources towards harvesting of this data, training this data, and then a community comes up that is theirs? Well, so the thing is balancing both interests of both the community and the company. One of the ways I would see ownership is everybody love to be seen, right? Everybody love to be heard. And I feel that one subtle way that this is usually demonstrated is towards, it's being demonstrated is the corporate social responsibility. You see, for instance, here in Nigeria, part of the things, big companies do is that they have budgets for their corporate social responsibility, where people, they go and give to communities, give scholarship to, less privileged communities, and then to students. So if one of the ways we can, because one of the ways you can express this ownership is not just because we know that Africa is still emerging, especially when it comes to skills, but one of the ways we could, companies could make indigenous community feel that they are being included in what they are doing. As you've mentioned, one would be to encourage participation, right? Another would be to also have some form of a way to include them in the process, because I believe that it might be a bit dicey, as somebody referred the question of the principle of web scraping as data mining on the Earth surface. Where just imagine those days where companies see a raw material somewhere, they go there, while mining, they provide pipe and water, they provide good education, they provide all this. So to know that you have these things, I am getting it, but in return, I am doing this to you. So though it might not be equitable, but there's just this feeling it creates that, yes, because of the existence or the presence of these people in this place, I'm able to have access to all this. So we could actually use that same principle to create some sense of ownership to data, while we are still trying to figure out, especially consent, withdrawal of consent when data are being processed. How do we, what would be the practicability of that? But, having some form of equitable ownership, equitable acts that gives people a feeling of being included and not just totally excluded from the entire process, and then the company is making a lot of money from their data and they are not getting anything from it. That's just my thoughts on that aspect of ownership.
Thank you. And if there are no other questions from the room, I actually have a comment about your presentation. So I really enjoyed, this conversation about art and imagery, but I think there's a lot to photography and the process of photography that it's not about taking a snapshot and that's the art. Most photographers, we consider shutter speed, focal length, what lens we're using, the cropping, our point of view, and we might photograph 400 photos and then edit that down to 20 and then juxtapose those 20 photos in a way to tell a really compelling story or be a part of a, international discourse. But a lot of these images that are just being stolen from other creatives, you're not getting anything new. And I think that's something that we've talked about a lot. So yeah, I'm just kind of curious, what photographers, you're speaking with on the actual process and, actual effort that goes into photography that's considered art. And then also, an element of art is that most artists consider it to tend to their well-being. And that's something, really qualitative that's being researched at Rutgers and the Arts and Health Research Lab. Is how you can use photography and other forms of art to tend to your well-being. And this might be biased of me, but I don't feel like, or I haven't observed, people having those same kinds of results from these AI-generated images. So yeah, that's just a thought if you have any responses to that.
Well, I mean, I don't disagree with you. And I haven't spoken with many photographers. I've spoken with lots of people who disagree with me and who agree with you that photography is art in a way that AI-generated images are not, because photographers put in a lot of efforts into the output of what they are creating. But I suppose if somebody is submitting images of themselves that capture certain aspects of their lives, and they are submitting it to a platform, a website that's generating images of them in different settings, and they are then curating which of these outputted images are most suitable to communicate something for their friends and family. I don't think that is meaningless, and I think for me, art has to do with meaning. And I don't think that is effortless either, because there's a lot of effort that goes into determining that. But although I don't think it's the same level of effort or the same level of time investments or training. So I think that on I suppose along the axis of morality, who is doing what is considered the most morally objectionable or unobjectionable, and who is suffering the most, I would say that creatives whose works are being stolen to train these products that people like myself are using to create images of themselves are suffering, are at a loss. But then when I think about, well, I suppose the sort of deprivation, I suppose, the environment in which, I suppose requires that you have to take from other people to eke out some sort of value, some sort of enjoyment, then I feel, I don't know, I feel like that sort of, I don't want to say it cancels it out, I don't think it does, but it makes it less black and white, I would say. I've forgotten your second question.
It's about research that's being done at Rutgers, actually, in the Arts and Health Research Lab. And it's just about like how creating art can improve your well-being. And so it's like very qualitative, but we're working with students at Rutgers. And you know, I'm not saying that AI-generated images aren't improving people's well-being, but I think that there are true benefits to like creating art that aren't, you know, it's not black and white like what you're saying. You know, it's, yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. Oh, wait, I understand what you're saying, but I don't agree with you. I think it boils down to that thing of effort and authenticity requiring the investment of resources. I don't know. That's.
I wanted to say, I kept on saying to you. Oh, sorry. I wanted to say, a photo that is taken in Africa and a photo that is taken in Europe will differ because of circumstances, certain circumstances. You would like to have a green tree where you have to take a photo, but the tree won't be around. So even circumstances such as history, the fact that you are poor, the camera that you are using, because it's not produced at a company in Europe, will make the photo differ. That's what I wanted to say.
Yes, thank you.
So I once again need to,
Thank you. I just had a quick comment. I think one of the things I hate the most about like the generative art field is that it stole the branding from a longer line of like people in like the computer art space have been using AI and technology to produce art for a long time, but not in exploitative ways. And before this like boom of generative AI, I was interested in like computer-assisted music or art or creative coding. So I think that the crucial distinction isn't a question of effort and it's not a question of technology, but it's a question of exploitation and power. And this is where like generative AI and the way that we refer to it now is so different, is that you're not just doing the work, but you're stealing other people's work, right?
did you want to respond? I'm just going to make an announcement. Okay, so actually I'm put in the awkward position of announcing my own presentation at 2 p.m. That's awkward. The good news is that it actually follows well from this conversation because it's about what we mean when we call someone a writer and what we mean when we call something writing or not writing. And it also, I'm not sure how many of you read Ted Chiang's science fiction. My title, The Life Cycle of Writing Subjects, is a riff off of a novella of his called The Life Cycle of Software Objects. So I talk about how the subtitle is an interdisciplinary look at generative AI and large language models, but I talk about how literary works can also be part of the interdisciplinary context through which we talk about this question of who or what or how is writer and writing. So if you want to join, it is of course purely optional. It will be going forward at 2 p.m. in this room. And on that note, I hand back to Rachel because I'm sure we all want to richly